All right, hello everybody out there, and welcome to this week's HackSurfer Hangout. Today we're going to be chatting with Brian Foster. He's the CTO of Damballa. They just released a study this week, so we'll be kind of chit-chatting about that. And if you guys do have any questions out there, feel free to submit them in the Google Q&A app, or on Twitter, or on HackSurfer, wherever, and we'll check those towards the end of the show and try to get those questions answered. How are you doing today, Brian?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, so I guess just kind of to get us started, if you can give maybe just a little background on your company and sort of what you do and kind of how you're related to cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Damballa. I've been at Damballa a little bit over a year. Damballa is a detection and response company. We basically fill the gap between failed prevention and incident response in enterprises, and kind of fill a very vital role in detecting the things that get through and helping the humans inside those enterprises deal with those things that get through and respond to them. And just quick, Jeff, quick back my background. As I said, I've been here a year and a half. I spent the first 21 years of my career at Symantec in a variety of roles, engineering, management, etc., and then spent 5 years at McAfee. So a lot of experience kind of working with big security companies. And I built or had teams working with me on building a lot of these prevention tools that enterprises are using today to kind of keep the bad guys out. And what I realized over the last few years is that those prevention tools are they're effective, but they're not 100%. Things get through, and you only have to open up the newspaper or your virtual newspaper online and see the numerous examples of that. And so I came to Damballa because, once again, Damballa does a great job of detecting those things to get through and telling enterprises about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you guys, at least my perception is you kind of focus on more of the advanced threats, advanced persistence threats. I guess just for the people out there who don't really know what APTs are, I've spoken to a few people, they just said the term's kind of confusing and they don't really know what it means. So I guess how do you kind of define that, and how do those kind of threats work?
Yeah, we actually catch all kinds of malware. We certainly catch advanced threats. We catch persistent threats. We catch very common threats, and there's probably no one thing you can say that's true for everything out there, right? So examples of advanced threats that we find are threats that do things like domain generation algorithms. These are threats that have very sophisticated in order to get around a lot of those prevention tools enterprises have that rely on blacklisting of domains and blacklisting of IP addresses based on reputation. This malware changes the domains and IP addresses they use frequently and dynamically, and so that's an example of advanced threats that we've built specific technology to go catch and identify, and that's an example of advanced. Persistents are the ones that are in there and you don't know about it because they evade things like sandboxes. They don't really communicate a lot, so you may not see them. And what have you, and so you see once again threats and that kind of go across that gamut. And what you also see, there are campaigns where there are many stages to that campaign, where the initial stage may actually be the entry point, may be very common malware that gets in the enterprise, and then at some point morphs into a more advanced attack or a persistent attack, or both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you guys just released a study this week. I was kind of reading it. I thought it was sort of interesting. I guess that's kind of where we got the title from, Cybercrime Cries Wolf. I think you guys had sort of the boy cries wolf in there. And I don't know, maybe if you can just kind of explain sort of what you guys mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that enterprises are having to deal with today is too many alerts. We actually saw in the Target example of the hack that they had, that they had alerts actually identifying that something suspicious was going on in their environment. But the problem is that they had thousands of those alerts. And even the largest enterprises only have a small team of incident responders. And what we identify in the infection report, the state of infections report that we released this week, is that there's just way too many alerts or suspicious events that are going on in a large enterprise that there's no way on earth a team of humans can go respond to. I think the data points in our report is like some of our largest customers get as many as 150,000 of those suspicious alerts a day. And so once again, you can't deal with those on a per human basis. And so the whole notion of crying wolf, right? Do you remember the story that the little boy goes off in the woods, he cries wolf, the villagers come out expecting to have to protect the boy and kill the wolf, and and there's no wolf. He's just playing around. He does that like 5 times, and then finally the 6th time, there's really a wolf, and he cries, and the villagers don't come because, and that's basically what happens in enterprises. They keep getting all these alerts, and they chase these alerts down, and it's not enough information to actually find an infection or to actually, and so after a while chasing their tail, they stop looking at some of those alerts, or they just can't get to them, and so that's the analogy that we make in the report.
Yeah, I guess just from like an outsider sort of looking at the situation, it just seems kind of like a silly sort of system, to say you have thousands of alerts every day.
Yeah.
So I guess, what's kind of the solution? Do you guys have any sort of way to sort of fix, that?
Well, that's an area that we focus. As I was saying earlier on, we focus on the gap between fail prevention and incident response, and what that means is we actually automatically detect the things to get through, but we don't send alerts to customers. What we do is we look for enough suspicious evidence, and only after we have enough suspicious evidence do we then tell a customer about an active infection. And so in that example I gave you earlier, we have large enterprise customers that may get 150,000 of these suspicious events today. They average, through our product, on average around 97 active infections that they're dealing with. So we take 150,000 down to 97, which, while actually 97 is still a big number and requires, is still a full handful but that's obviously a more manageable number. And so Damballa, I think, is an example of some of the automation around detection that needs to take place. And more importantly, that automation on detection has to kind of marry the different events that you're seeing across your enterprise into enough evidence to convict an asset. I use the kind of court of law analogies all the time, where you got to get beyond, the burden of proof has to be X, and you've got to get above that X before you involve a human. And that's what our product does, and we do very effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, it's kind of sort of balancing, sort of the human versus the automated. I just kind of wonder, I guess, you kind of read a lot about how people say, you need to kind of have the human element to sort of figure that out, so I just wonder sort of where that balance is, and, kind of if you get any sort of concern, maybe if you're automating stuff that you guys might be missing stuff that a human might catch or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that, so I've seen that, as well. I think, as I said earlier, we kind of focused on the automatic detection and then streamline the response process. And what I like to say is make the response process automatable. And so the concerns around the automation come more from response than they do detection. So the automatic detection is absolutely what has to happen, because once again, humans cannot be in the loop if you're trying to whittle 150,000 down to 97. We have for years had SIMs. SIMs have taken aggregate log data from every security product in the enterprise, and humans for at least the last 10 years have tried to create correlation rules in SIMs to identify attacks, and it's not working. The attacks are still getting through. One of the big challenges with SIMs is they're typically a consolidation of all the logs from your security products. Well, your security products only log the things they know to log, and if they don't see something, they can't log it, right? So once again, SIMs end up being a little bit of a blind spot as well. So the automation of detection, I think, makes sense, and I don't think humans need to be involved in that as long as you maintain, a true positive and a zero false positive rate in that detection. The part where you do get to where you're talking about, I think that humans have to be involved, is on the response process. And that's where, I don't think IT says, automatically respond to all these threats. I think what they want is, can you prioritize the infections you do see? So I know which ones are the most important, and you can automatically prioritize based on, in Damballa's product, we have 9 different risk engines that every time we see an infection, we rank the risk of that, and it could be like how much data is exfiltrating, is it actively connecting to a command and control server, what's the asset value of the asset itself from your CMDB, little things like that all go to a risk factor. So the first step is prioritization, and then can we provide steps that for some infections and some assets, there may be automatic steps that you can take, so you don't have to have a human go do it, and so forth. So that's why I like to say automatable instead of automation on that response side, because if we can make the incident responder's job easier, make them do more with less in quicker time, and then 2 of the metrics that I think are the most important for incident response to measure them by, which is the time to detection and time to remediation, they can drive both of those values way down.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I guess if you're sort of seeing a lot of threats, every day, in you guys' system, I'm just kind of curious if there's any sort of, I guess, trends or kind of typical things you guys see that sort of stands out or anything kind of unique.
Yeah, it's interesting. We see. So first of all, I talked about domain generation algorithms earlier, which are more advanced versions of malware. We're seeing, once again, a higher percentage of threats use these DGAs, and once again, it kind of makes sense if you think about it from a threat actor's perspective. This is big business for threat actors, right? This is how they make their living, either individually or as part of an organization. And if that's your business, you're gonna build resiliency into your malware and into your infrastructure. And as you've seen in the news lately, the FBI and some commercial companies have participated in taking down parts of the infrastructure behind some of these botnets and criminal crimeware. And so one way to get around that, if you're a criminal actor, is to add this domain generation algorithm, because once again, if you look up a different domain every day or every week and et cetera, it's much harder for somebody to take your infrastructure down. Therefore, your malware is more resilient, and you'll be up and running and making money for longer. And so that's an example of one of the trends we see. Frankly, one of the other trends we're seeing is malware that's evading sandboxes. I think that one of the phenomenons that's happened over the last, 2 years is you've seen sandboxes kind of be the new silver bullet that everybody has to have around trying to detect malware. Now, Damballa has a sandbox, but it's only one of the different 8 ways that we automatically detect malware. And what we're seeing is more and more malware knows it's running in a sandbox and it doesn't execute. And so all these sandboxes that are out there, if they're not a silver bullet, they certainly do catch some malware, but they're not going to catch it all. And so that's another example of some of the trends we're seeing in terms of the infections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading a report just earlier today. I think it came out beginning of this month. I think it was from Imperva. It was called the Non-Advanced Persistent Threat. I think the sort of gist of it was just that, I guess like when I think of an advanced threat, I always think government espionage and zero-day attacks and advanced things like that. And they were just kind of making the point that like that's the perception, but there's actually a lot of I guess real simple methods that people can use to do advanced threats. So I was just kind of curious, if you guys sort of see that. I always think like I said, government espionage, or I think like millions of dollars being stolen. I mean, do you guys see other kind of advanced threats out there?
Yeah, I try to stay away from using the phrase APT because it in some ways it's taken on a meaning of its own and so forth. Once again, one of the biggest motives behind malware that sticks and is still there is just the financial motive, and that drive causes people to innovate on both sides of that problem, both on the defense but also on the attacking side. So you see very advanced attacks trying to be man-in-the-middle attacks for your credentials, logging into banks and financial institutions. So you see all form of advanced malware. So advanced is definitely not limited to just cyber espionage and state-sponsored attacks. In fact, some of your state-sponsored attacks are actually sometimes some stages of those attacks are very rudimentary, they use, as I said earlier, they use common malware, possibly to distribute, to do the reconnaissance, etc. So. I think that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess another kind of interesting thing I kind of see about sort of big data is there's kind of sort of like a big data backlash. Some articles, I don't know, people are just kind of getting sick of the term, or if they kind of feel maybe it's not necessarily working or they're overwhelmed by it. Just kind of curious your thoughts on that, or if you kind of ever get that sort of when you're dealing with customers.
Well, so it's a great topic for me because it's also one of those, there's several phrases that kind of get into that little area of where they've taken on a meaning of their own, and so I try not to use them. I say APT is one of those, and actually big data is another, because honestly, big data is not that great. What's great is the analytics and what you do with the big data. So, I've met enterprise after enterprise that, okay, so they collected all the data, now what did they do? And so forth. So, but a little bit of background. So, Damballa has 8 detection engines in our product, and these 8 detection engines work together to build, as I was saying earlier, enough evidence of an infection to actually call it an infection, and one of the things our customers say that they like best about our products is that if we tell somebody that there's an infection, it's 100% confident it's an infection. And once again, the way we do that is we take those 8 different engines, and we don't just rely on single one of them to say it's infected. We rely on corroboration across these engines. And a great example is I talked about a sandbox earlier, where if we see a file in a sandbox that's malicious, that's not enough for us just to tell a customer that you've got an active infection. We actually, as soon as that file was downloaded by an asset, we started doing complete packet captures of that asset, and we're looking at all the network communications from that asset to see, did it exhibit the behavior that malware exhibited in the sandbox, so that we can know not only did that file get to the asset, but it ran it and got infected. And so, for example, you may have malware that's Windows malware that downloaded on a Mac. If you're just sandboxing, you might get an alert saying, hey, you got an active infection, but then you go chase it down and you find out, hey, it's a Mac, I'm not infected. This goes back to the Crying Wolf system. But so, long story short, so those 8 detection engines, except for the sandbox, are actually built on a large amount of data that Damballa gets on a daily basis. So we see almost half of North American internet traffic through our relationships with ISPs. And we have 2 products at Damballa. We have one that sits on ISPs and others that sits in enterprises. And the one that sits on ISPs is sitting there helping ISPs find infected subscribers. And as part of that process, we're able to see metadata about the network on ISPs that we collect and we put in our Hadoop cluster in Atlanta, Georgia, where we're based. And we have 9 different data scientists that build machine learning systems. Have machine learning systems that build these models and these algorithms that help us detect these threats in the network traffic. And so I talked about domain generation algorithms. We have one of our machine learning systems helps us automatically detect domain generation algorithms. So this is an example where we collect, it's like 22.5 billion events a day going to our Hadoop cluster. That collecting the data is one thing. Having data scientists build these machine learning systems and these data science systems that actually spit out models and algorithms that we can then put in our product on a daily basis, because it gets updated daily, to go find these suspicious events that we can correlate and corroborate together to find active infection. So that's an example where I think big data is applied. So by all definitions of big data, that applies here. But what's most important is not just that we have the data, but what we do with it. Hopefully that all made sense, Jeff.
Yeah, that definitely does. I'm wondering if you guys work at all with small businesses, because like on our site, we kind of write a lot of articles, about where small businesses should start, and obviously, you always talk about starting with the basics, just having good passwords, simple things like that. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, as a business is growing, at what point do they kind of sort of shift away from just that basic cybersecurity model to, kind of integrating more kind of advanced products like you guys offer, or threat detection, things like that?
Yeah, so our sweet spot is in the enterprise and the ISP space, which is kind of the higher end of that spectrum, if you will, size and complexity. But we do have small business customers, and medium-sized customers. The product works very well. It's very easy to use. But typically, what we find is larger enterprise customers are actually, are more advanced in terms of budgets and things like that to actually have an incident response team, for example. So one of the examples that a small medium business has to consider when they buy our product, and whenever I talk to them, this is one of the things I say is, we're going to tell you about active infections you have in your environment, guaranteed, right? We don't go into an environment and not find some. You have to have a process, or at least somebody to actually deal with those active infections. We'll do everything. We'll gift wrap all the forensic information, everything you need. Prioritize. Here's the one that's most important. But you need to have a process internally about what you're going to do with that. And there are small medium businesses that are more advanced that have that, and it fits right in. But there's also a lot of them that don't, that don't. Right, and so going hand in hand with a tool like Damballa is the process, and a person at least that probably has 10 jobs, but one of those needs to be, what am I going to do with an active infection when I find it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. One thing I guess that I kind of found interesting, we had Proofpoint on probably like a month or two ago, but they were basically talking about how I think the quote was 95% was the stat of targeted attacks start with phishing. Which I just kind of found interesting. It seems like, I guess in my mind, I'm kind of new to cybersecurity, but from what I've read, sort of that's always been the problem is phishing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if there's really any way to fix that, but I'm just kind of curious your thoughts, because it seems like that's kind of always sort of the baseline of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've always said as long as there's a carbon-based life form on the other side of the computer, somebody's going to get you to click on a link that you didn't want to click on. And email is always, obviously email's been one of the primary new ways of communication over the last 20 years, and it's phenomenal with what it's enabled us to communicate. But I've managed large teams of engineers. They were working on security products, but I always said that if I sent them an email that said pictures of Anna Kournikova with the malicious link in it, half of the team, even as smart as they would click the link, right? So there's a human behavior element to this. And some of this is why I think, once again, if I ever cross the aisle and own an IT team, one of the most important priorities is user education. I'm still trying to train my mom and dad, though, and to limited success on what to click and what not to click, right? And so phishing is always going to be, and it's actually been, I think, exacerbated because how much people can learn about you online. Right now, I know some people that they don't join Facebook, they don't do anything online, so you couldn't learn. But I know a lot of people that they post their live stories on Facebook, and so if you wanted to, for example, do a targeted attack at somebody that has a public profile, you could find out, hey, their son had a soccer game on Saturday, and so you could craft an email saying, hey, I took some pictures of your kid playing with mine, here it is, and then lo and behold, that link is malicious, and you can take advantage of a vulnerability in their browser, exploit, blah, 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 get down the chain. So yeah, phishing is still one of the primary entry points, and it's unless you get people just to stop reading email. But then, so just to carry on this point, Jeff. So I have a young daughter that never does email, but she's on Instagram and she's on Snapchat, etc. And once again, it's still easy to get a link in one of those places and have her accidentally click on it because so those malicious links through phishing and email or other ways is still one of the major entry points. So.
Yeah, kind of following up on that, it's sort of an unrelated question, but one that I guess everyone sort of thinks about. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. Just like you mentioned, like having a daughter, on social media. I think everyone's got kids or nieces or nephews or whatever. So yeah, I kind of wonder. If you kind of have any advice or kind of practical tips that you use, to kind of, for example, I got a, nephew, and I'm sure he's just clicking on everything, on the internet. Is there any kind of practical advice you have for people like with kids and kind of how to manage that sort of thing?
Well, just first and foremost, as a parent, you got to have the talk with your kids, on what you can and can't do online, and whatnot. So there's an education element to it that I think once again is important. Now, the other thing that I do, because in my house, so I have 3 kids, a wife and 2 dogs, and probably about 24 connected devices at home. So I'm probably on one end of that spectrum of how many connected devices people have. But one of the things that I realized, once again with my background, is I can't install endpoint security on all those devices. A lot of them are Apple devices where it's not even possible to, and whatnot. But at the same time, even on Apple devices, you can click on a link that you're not supposed to. You can go to a site that you weren't supposed to because you got misdirected or something like that. So one of the things I do is I leverage a cloud service for my home so that all of my network communications gets filtered at the gateway instead of on every device. So anybody, even if it's a friend that comes over to visit with my daughters, if they connect to my Wi-Fi, they're automatically getting filtered. They can't go to inappropriate sites. They can't go to malware sites, and it's not a perfect solution. It's maybe a 99% solution though, which is good enough for what I need for my home. And so the second practical step is there are solutions out there, and there are several of these, for example, where you can change your DNS entries in your home router so that policy can get applied to your DNS lookups at home. Once again, and you can apply conflict filtering, which is don't go to bad sites. Applies some malware analysis. Don't go to malicious sites. You can even lock things down in terms of if you want to be draconian, which I'm not. You can't go to social media sites in certain hours, things like that. But so that's another example I think of how do you protect the home when it's a connected home. And my personal philosophy, which once again why I went to Damballa, away from these endpoint vendors that I worked at for 25 years, is I think the future of security is in the cloud or in the network, and that's what I do at home. So that's probably another good advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're kind of talking a little bit about how you used to work at Symantec. They were kind of in the news recently because one of their executives said, I think they said something like, antivirus is dead. Just kind of wondering, someone who kind of used to work there, what you kind of think about that kind of whole concept.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So I obviously read the reports and what have you, and I'm certainly glad I wasn't the one in the news saying this, because the part of the report that I thought they probably wish they didn't say or they shouldn't have said is that they don't see themselves making any money on it. Because the fact of the matter is, if you go look at Symantec's balance sheet or their quarterly earnings, they're still making a couple $2 billion off of their antivirus estate, and to say that they're not, I thought was kind of funny. Now, this whole notion that AV is dead has been around for 10 years. When I was at Symantec, the last 8 years there, I owned the enterprise endpoint business, and I knew then that the blacklisting of signatures was not effective. So if you looked at what Symantec did then, as well, we acquired and built technologies that didn't rely on signatures but caught threats in different ways. So most of your AV vendors have already shifted away from pure signature-based to other types of detection. And so that's one thing. I think the other thing that's very interesting there is, in the enterprise specifically, I don't see AV going away in the sense that, on Windows primarily, because that's pretty the only platform where you're in the long term going to be able to even still have AV, and there's even views that Microsoft will continue to close the door on AV vendors' ability to even do AV on Windows. But on Windows, antivirus can provide a very valuable remediation step. I don't think it's providing a detection step. There's many reports out there saying that your AV solutions are catching from 5% to 15 to 20% of the new threats, right? And so what you'll find is, customers will use a solution like Damballa's to detect something, right? But then we can integrate with the AV vendor, tell the AV vendor about it, so that the AV vendor can go then and remediate. And so I see the value migrating from detecting for AV to being part of the remediation process. And so it's still important. It's still part of some regulation, so it's not going away. But the other thing that's happened for the AV vendors is they've seen the budget from enterprises that's being spent on desktop AV also migrating to other solutions like ours. They're saying, hey, if AV is not detecting, the value to me is much lower. I'm going to I'm going to pay Symantec or McAfee or whomever less and go spend that on something that does detect things for me. Mm-hmm. So it's a good topic, and I said AV's dead thing's been around a while. I don't think it's dead. I just think that the value is migrated, and I think it's still valuable.
One other thing I kind of wanted to ask you about before we're done, just in the study you guys released, I was reading. I guess everyone kind of talks about it, sort of just like the length of time that it takes. I think the Verizon report was 50% of attacks take months or more to sort of identify and resolve. Yeah. So I guess it's something we've kind of been hearing for years. Just kind of curious to get your thoughts on maybe like why that is, or if there's anything that can sort of be done to help improve that number.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Verizon data breach has been kind of banging the same drum now for a couple of years, which is a very valuable drum to bang, which is, when you look inside enterprises today, you can almost think about the investment in IT security kind of in three columns, right? And the first column is prevention, second column is detection, and the third is response. And if you looked at where the investment dollars are going in that spectrum, you're finding that most of it's going in prevention and with very little being put in detect and respond. And what the Verizon data breach study is coming out with is, okay, prevention's great, but you're not preventing everything. Things are getting through, and because you don't have much investment in detect and respond, it's going on for months, and it's going on for months, and it's typically getting detected by a third party, sometimes a three-letter agency. And so what I think is going to happen, and what's happening today, is you're starting to see investments start to go more into detect and respond. Some of it's coming away from prevention, so you're going to see leveling across those three columns to where you're going to get a little bit more of an even investment. But some of it's also the additional investment that's going into IT security is going into detect and respond. And so I think that's what the Verizon data breach study is kind of saying is you need to invest more in detect and respond. It's not saying you don't need to prevent. Once again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, but you're not preventing everything. So you've got to have some ability to detect and respond, and that's certainly part of the market wave that Damballa is taking advantage of, and others. So.
Mm-hmm. I guess final question then. just kind of looking at sort of like the trends going forward. A lot of the stories you read, looking at 2013, everything's sort of, the biggest hacks, everything's sort of getting bigger, and you're seeing more records getting breached and things like that. So I'm just kind of curious if you think, over the next couple of years, we're going to continue that, where 2014, 2015, everything just keeps, kind of escalating up, or if you think we're ever going to get to the point where we kind of do see maybe a little lull in that sort of upwards trend.
It's hard for me to prognosticate on that. I do think that we're going to continue to see the attacks, because I think it's going to take a couple of years for that level of investment to happen in the macro environment. I see North America and a lot of sophisticated companies already have leveled off their investment into doing a lot of detection and response. When I go to other parts of the world, I see they're still behind the curve. So I don't think we're through this bad stretch yet. I think it's going to continue for a while. But once again, I do see some of our customers that are doing a better job of this investment and leveling that investment, and therefore doing a better job of detecting and responding.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. We do this every Friday, so anyone out there who's watching, feel free to tune in every Friday or go to our YouTube page, and you guys can watch all these. Everything gets archived on there. Have a good weekend. Appreciate you coming on, Brian.
Thank you, Jeff. I really enjoyed it.